So very good evening to all and all present here. Today we are going to talk about the theory class, which is about theories of growth. So, as far as the orthodontics is concerned, the very important aspect is about your craniofacial growth. As we can see that the orthodontic branch itself has been divided into three further divisions, which is preventive orthodontics, interceptive orthodontics, and corrective orthodontics. This division itself is mainly based on the growth of individual. So, how does the craniofacial growth takes place? The influence of that growth over the entire treatment plan, understanding of the malocclusion, and how we are handling the case, how the stability will be, how we are guiding it. So all these things are determining even the such an oldest branch to be into further three divisions. So today we'll be seeing the theories of growth. Like we are trying to understand the craniofacial growth based on a different model of representation. That is the theory. Theorem does say about the model of representation, how a thing takes place, like how an event taking place here. The craniofacial growth is the event, but how does it takes place, which is the most appropriate. Why we need to know about this? Because whenever there is a deviation from the near normal event, how there is a problem, why there is a deviation, which aspect is getting altered. So how we can interpret in order to understand where there is a deviation, in order to understand where things have went wrong, first we should know about how the things are happening, what is normal. So this theories of growth, that means we are trying to see the craniofacial growth. We are trying to see the events taking place in such a manner from birth till your growth completion, postnatal growth completion. So we are trying to represent certain models like BV. When I say means, there are people, scientists who have already studied since centuries and decades ago about how a normal craniofacial growth of the human is taking place. By knowing this basic, we can easily interpret when the patient represents to us whether it is a problem in which aspect, whether it is in the mandible or maxilla or in the way of growth or in the pattern or in the size. Like there are multiple factors like which is wrong. To know that only we are going to study about it. So it is not just only for orthodontics. If you know this basic aspect of growth, you can easily apply it in other departments also. So other fraternities will also go with it. So when we see about orthodontics, I want you to know at basic level from a UG side certain theory in detail. But I have given the entire list of the theories which is being given. Certain theories are quite level for postgraduate students, but still I want you to remember or know the names at least. So you can see in this slide, I have given around 8, 9, 10. So the 10 theories in which one word has been repeated again. See, genetic theory, remodeling theory, sutural theory, cartilaginous theory, functional matrix theory, von Linbox multifactorial, neurotrophic servo system, functional matrix hypothesis revisited, and a growth relativity hypothesis. So these are all the theories so far people like scientists or researchers have tried to correlate and try to represent the way the craniofacial growth takes place. So we'll see one by one, and you can easily remember each theory based on the term already that has been quoted for this. See, like genetic theory. So genetic theory, it means that we're trying to represent the growth based on the gene. So genetic basis. So remodeling. So there is a remodel. Sutural theory. So suture is going to play some important role in that. So likewise, with the name you can easily understand. So try to remember the name first of all, and we will see one by one how that this works. So the genetic theory, the oldest one. To see here, it is from 1920. Now, one other important thing is that I have arranged it based on your chronology, like the oldest one to the newest one. So first is genetic theory. That is from 1920 to 1940. In between this period, they have given this theory. So this theory. It is mainly based on the observations. What does it mean? That certain things when we propose, we need to prove it because it is a scientific base. There should be evidence. So in order to prove that, there should be a trials or studies that should have been executed, but not necessarily everything. Initial days it was just only based on the observation rather than the experiments. So that is what it means. The genetic theory is mainly based on experiments. Here you can see that the classical Mendelian genetics, he has given already a whole set of proposed theory, thesis, genomic thesis regarding your A gene and then dominant and then recessive kind of things, the table which we remember, right? It is from the school days itself. So here they are trying to give the same thing in the craniofacial growth also, like morphogenesis. It is a predetermined reading out of an intrinsic and inherited genomic blueprint, like genome, that is from the moment of fertilization contains all the information necessary to regulate, like want to cause anything, any change, or you want to control the amount of growth or regulate the craniofacial growth. So every single thing that will be controlled based on the gene only. Like if someone is like this, so purely it is only the gene. Whatever the data is given inside the gene is in the DNA, then it is what is going to express. That is what the genetic theory. There is no other single factor. So when we see about this genetic theory, it is like this. Like if a patient is having malocclusion, he is just having malocclusion. We can't do anything much. It is because the gene itself is like that. That is what it means. So there are certain people who have studied what, like Brody in 1941 told that persistent pattern of facial configuration and assumed it was another type genetic control. And raised you were told the facial shape, size, the position, that are all qualitative and quantitative changes that genetically predetermined. Whereas this genetic theory, it says that genes determined all. So it is like it is called, it was like a more assumed theory rather than the proven, because it is based on only the Mendelian observations. No one have tried to prove it. So if you see this, the correlation, because whatever we study just before beginning the seminar, I told, right, like these theories, we are trying to understand the normal craniofacial growth because we want to apply it clinically. So the clinical correlation, if you see, it is less than 15% because we can able to alter certain things, we can able to control certain things clinically. So when we can clinically control certain things, that means that it cannot be 100% genetically determined process, right? It is as simple as that. So this theory is not a proven one, not accepted as well. Yes, definitely there is a contribution from the genetic aspect. Like you are looking like your mom, you are looking like your dad. Things are in that way, but still not 100%. It is that only way that genes are going to produce. So the research focused on identifying the broad site under the genetic control. Sutures, craniofacial cartilages, and periosteum were thought to be under the genetic control and acted as a broad site. Whereas no evident scientific data were presented and lacked the scientific understanding and soon replaced by the other theories. So when we see about the craniofacial growth, there are components, right? We have a sutures, cartilages, periosteum, muscles, bone, and all these structures contribute altogether the craniofacial structures like your face, head, and neck. But certain areas had that genetic influence much more than the remaining structures. That means that certain areas are not under the genetic control, only certain areas. When things are like this, the 100% control is not there, clinical correlation is less than 15%, we are unable to prove it. It is not having a strong evidence. So once the evidence is not there, then it is out of our way. Now, next comes your remodeling theory, Brash. He also said it in between the period of 1930s, like your genetic was in between 20 and 40, here it is in 30s. Here, what is the basis of remodeling theory? So the initial days, everyone had this thought. Bone. Bone is the major component. So all their focus was only on the bone, how the bone grows, how there is a changes happening in the bone. So whatever happens with the bone is going to give your shape, size, and it is going to control major part of your craniofacial growth. So everyone focused on how there is a changes happening in the bone. That is why this remodeling theory has come up. See, the foundation for the development of the first general theory of craniofacial growth is this. But the remodeling theory talks about bone only grows by oppositionally at surfaces, like growth of the jaws or a deposition one side and the resorption on the other side. Due to the maxilla and mandible getting deposited continuously, there is increase in the size. Whereas the cranial, so clavarial growth, that is by means of deposition on the ectocranial surface of cranial wall and resorption of the bone on the endocranial surface, like a remodeling theory. So he focuses mainly on irrespective of genetically what is predetermined. Here, the growth occurs mainly by means of your deposition on one side and resorption on the other side, which is otherwise known as your remodeling, which you can see in this diagram. It is actually the cranial wall. How there is increase in size in the cranial wall? See, there is a minus. Minus indicates there is the resorption, which is endocranial surface. Whereas the plus, which actually indicates your deposition on the exocranium. So when this is happening, there is an enlargement. The outer surfaces keep enlarging. That is how there is a growth. So this is the contributing factor to your cranial growth. Likewise in maxilla. In maxilla and mandible, he is telling posterior aspect. There is a keep on deposition, so it is keep increasing and then size is enlarging. That is how the remodeling theory happens. But here again, it is actually a failed theory. The reason being, apart from deposition and resorption in the bone, we have cartilages, we have muscles, and we have capsule and sizes like oral spaces. There are spaces in the craniofacial structure, which is not always by means of this remodeling process. So the remaining things are also there, right? So how that is taking place. So now comes your seizure. What he thought is that rather than the surface remodeling, what Brash told, it is not just a surface. It is mainly your sutures. As like we know, so many sutures contribute together to form this entire craniofacial region. So there are a lot of sutures, right? So initial days the number of sutures is high, and then over a period it reduced to 22. But now these sutures are the main areas where there is a growth. That is what the sutural dominance theory. We have cartilage, we have suture, we have muscles, we have surface of a bone, we have flat bones. But still, it is mainly the sutures which controls and contributes, like the connective tissue and cartilaginous joints of craniofacial skeleton. It's like much like epiphysis of long bones and the principal locations at which the intrinsic genetically regulated primary growth of bone takes place. Though there is a connective tissue, though there is a cartilaginous joints are there, but the suture having the intrinsic genetically regulated primary growth of bone takes place. So this is the main contributor for the entire pattern, size, shape of your craniofacial region. That is what he thought, and that is what he is trying to explain. So he is now quoting the different sutural sites like lambdoid suture and the sagittal suture, which we can see the main area that growth takes place, which contribute to now the increase in size as well as the spatial positioning that is taking place. If you see this sutural theory, though it is right, there are certain evidences which is not letting the sutural theory universally acceptable. What? The translatory growth. The translatory growth of the bones continue normally, either in the absence of suture or through extirpation of experimental animal. What does it mean? It means that if suture is the main thing, then if suture is not there, then there should not be growth. That is the idea, right? If sutural dominance theory, suture are the places where there is an important or a primary growth takes place, then if suppose that suture is not there, then there should not be growth. But it is not what they observed. Even if suture is there, even if suture is not there, still there was growth which was continuing. So when the bone is still continue to grow even in the absence of suture, that means that suture cannot be the dominant part, right? Like in untreated cleft palate, though suture is not present, still there was growth. And another important thing. So in the previous slide, what we saw? Intrinsic, genetically regulated primary growth at the site of suture. That is what we thought. But if that is the case, whether the suture is in its place or we take it and then try to keep it other areas also, that is transplanting. there should be growth, right? Because we tell it is intrinsically having a genetic potential to grow. Whether you keep it in this area, you suppose you're taking a chronos here, you take from here to transport it to some other area which is favorable environment for the growth. But still it should grow like culture medium, a in vitro site, or some other part with the same environment and condition. But if it doesn't grow, it means that it doesn't have its intrinsic. That is what happened. So the auto transplants of suture fail to grow in the culture medium even when we provide the same kind of environment and the conditions. I hope you can follow me. So these things led to a sutural theory failed. So when we are talking about a theory, we should understand that it should be a scientifically proven, it should be like a universally acceptable one, and it should try to fulfill all the characteristics of the growth that is taking place. When it is not, then it is going to fail, and we try to go for an improved version. Now, the shape and growth within the suture is dependent on external stimuli. So, we saw that even if we extirpate the suture, there is a translatory growth. Even in cleft cases where there is no suture, still growth was taking place. And if you do auto transplantation, there is no intrinsic potential. Likewise, the shape and growth, if you see, then within the suture, it was actually a dependent process of your external stimuli. Like, we can even either increase or you halt your sutural growth by means of your mechanical stresses applied. Like we can say use of the headgear appliances, or we use a reverse face mask to pull. And then when we apply such kind of a pressure, there is a deposition taking place in the sutural area. That means when you externally apply something, we give that external stress, external force, environmental effect can produce changes in your sutures. So that is how we fail to address this. So the sutures are not your main area. Then, so first one, what we saw, the very first one talks about your genetic theory. Everything is predetermined in your genes. That way. Then we thought about the surface. The bony surfaces with the remodeling is the main area of a growth we try to represent. Though it is all happening, that is not the main concept. Then we thought it is the suture which is actually the main part. But again now we come to know it failed. The Scott in 50s came up with the importance of your cartilages. So as like with the suture, we saw like lot of sutures in the craniofacial region. We do also have your different cartilages which is playing important role, like the synchondrosis. We know, right? We have a synchondrosis in your craniofacial structure in the cranial base, an important aspect of your growth cycle. And in the nasal area, the nasal septal theory. According to Scott, what he taught is that the cartilages, primary cartilages, are having your acting as a growth center, having an intrinsic growth potential. As you can see in this diagram, this is the anterior cranial base, and then that anterior cranial base in the anterior inferior region is getting attached with your posterior superior part of your nasal cartilage, septal cartilage. This is your maxilla, and this is your posterior, and then this is PM pointer. Here there is sutures. Though there are sutures, still the nasal septal cartilage which is present, which is growing, that is anterior inferior direction, that is going to pull the entire maxillary premaxillary part along with it. So once the pull is from your septal cartilage, for that particular pull, the suture is getting adjusted, and then further there is a growth. Like according to Scott, as I told, there is a middle cranial fossa where there is a cranial base. In the cranial base, we have a spino-occipital synchondrosis that is responsible for the growth of your cranial base. Likewise, you have your nasal septal cartilage, which is responsible for your growth of maxilla. And you have your condylar cartilages, which is responsible for your growth of mandible. So for this mandible, we have a cartilage. For your maxillary region, mid face, we have a cartilage. And for your cranial base, we have a cartilage. So cartilages plays an important role. But again, we need to prove it, right? When we say something, we need to prove it. What? You see this diagram. As we told that if nasal septal cartilage is the main reason for the growth of your mid-maxillary region or mid-facial region, this patient who underwent a extirpation of cartilage, removal of cartilage due to trauma at the age of around 8 years. Still, his face has completed his growth. Upper lip is gone up. There is definitely a deficiency which we can observe, but still the remaining parts of the face are still grown up. So the cartilage are not the primary aspect. If cartilage is not there, there will be a deficiency. But if cartilage is not there, then there is no growth. No such kind of concept applies. Again, the cartilages failed to establish, but still the primary cartilages, they were growing. They had intrinsic potential to grow. That aspect was there, but the concept of telling the cartilages are the main growth center or main area where reason for the remaining structures to grow, that failed. Next is the functional matrix hypothesis. 1962 Melvin Marx told about this. Now here, one important thing is that whatever theories we saw just now is like your genetic theory, remodeling, suture, cartilaginous theory, all are kind of your theories with your static position, not in your respect to your functional or dynamic position. This functional matrix hypothesis, here it is the most accepted theory, though it is not the Melvin Marx who had this initial concept. It is a Wagner class in 1948 who talked about your functional cranial component. That is, all bones were in reality composed of the functional cranial components. Just a second, you go back and then see remodeling, suture theory, or cartilaginous theory. All those theories were talking about your bony structures, cartilages, bone. All these structures are mainly the hard tissue. A semi or a hard tissue, semi-hard tissue or a hard tissue structures, right? But this functional cranial component talks about it is not your skeletal tissues. It is not your skeletal tissues. Rather, it is your non-skeletal tissues and your organs. So what here he is telling, this hypothesis is that origin, growth and maintenance of all your skeletal tissues and organs are always, see, remember, they are always a secondary mechanism or a compensatory mechanism or a mechanically obligatory response to a temporarily morphogenetically changes, the prior changes what is specifically happening related to your non-skeletal tissue. If non-skeletal tissue is growing, then when there is a growth in the non-skeletal tissue, what is non-skeletal tissue? We have nerves, we have muscle, we have glands, right? We have soft tissue structures, right? So whenever there is a change in the soft tissue structures, your periosteum and your peritoneal cavity, you have your tissue surrounding your skin organ, it is also a big organ, right? So these kind of non-skeletal tissues, whatever changes or growth is happening, according to that the bone will get altered. So according to that the growth of the bone will be, according to that whether the size and shape of the bone will be. That is the meaning. If suppose mandible is 10 millimeter in size, the lengthwise. So what are the structures which is attached to the mandible? Your muscles of mastication, masseter, and the chin region. We have genioglossus and geniohyoid muscles. So all these muscles and the glandular attachment going to determine the length of the mandible for that particular case. So as according to Moss, bones do not grow. They are always grown. They can only just get adjusted and then shaped and maintained according to your remaining growth of the tissues. So when we talk about the remaining growth, it is not just the growth, but also the function. So comes the functional matrix theory. First one is the matrix, which we saw. What is the matrix? Your non-skeletal tissues. Whereas the function of your non-skeletal tissues leads to change. So the form follows function. Initial days they thought, according to your cartilaginous theory, according to your bone, all those things, the function follows your form. So whatever is the facial structure, according to that you're going to function. but it is not true. It is that the function leads to the form of the particular individual. That is what it is. So what are the functions we generally do here with the craniofacial region? Respirate, vision, olfaction, hearing, and balance. So each function is carried out by the functional cranial component FCC. The functional cranial component is very important. Remember this word. Who told about this? It is the Wonder class in 1948. Yes. The Wonder class in 1948, the person first talked about your functional cranial component. That is, the craniofacial growth, every structure, especially your skeletal tissues, are based on, or regulated, or maintained based on your functional matrices. So, for one function, what are all the components we have? We have your skeletal tissue, we have your neural, we have the muscle, and we have your vascular tissue. Everything put together as a multifactorial, the functional cranial component comes out. But if you divide the functional cranial components into different aspects, so with a skeletal unit or with respect to your matrices, we can get other further two divisions like the skeletal unit. In a broad sense, the skeletal can be divided into your microskeletal units and your macroskeletal units. Likewise, the matrices can be divided into periosteal matrices and your capsular matrices. This microskeletal unit are directly associated with your periosteal matrices. Likewise, your macroskeletal unit are associated with your capsular matrices. Let's see one by one. Skeletal unit. Skeletal, as we say, this word itself is composed of your skeletal like bone, cartilage, or tendinous tissue. So it can be either for the micro or macro. What is macroskeletal unit? The main part of your entire training, the bigger aspect, the bigger structure. You can say the maxilla as a whole bone or mandible as a whole bone, the big structure, the big thing. That is the macroskeletal unit. But if you see inside that, there are small certain parts which we can divide further into small. That is microskeletal unit. Here, the macroskeletal unit, adjoining portions of number of neighboring bones carrying out a single function. Not the bones of formal classic osteology, like the entire calvaria. So see this word, not the bones of formal classic osteology. Like in osteology, how we talk, we segregate the bone in a, based on your suture. This is the temporal bone, this is the coronal, and this is the parietal, and here you get occipital. So based on the osteology basis, we have the divide, but we are not dividing based on the osteology. Here, based on the functional segment. Then the entire four bones further function as a single bone. Then single function is taking place. That is a one macroskeletal unit. Like calvaria, when we say what all, we have coronal bone, we have parietal, we have the part of temporal and occipital. This entire part, it is your skull box, right? This is casing your brain. It is protecting your brain. This is the main function, right? So this all bone together as a single function protecting your brain. They're forming your brain case. So the endocranial surface of calvaria. Likewise, now comes your microskeletal unit. If we see this microskeletal unit, now we divide them into small bones. Like if we say maxilla, it is a macroskeletal unit. But if we see in the maxilla, we have your orbital part, we have your pneumatic part, we have your parietal part, we have your basal part. So you are dividing them further into small units. Then it is again based on the function. See, it is not simply like just like that. What orbital part? Orbital part of maxilla contribute to your vision, the orbital capsule. Pneumatic part is contributing to your respiration. Parietal part is your speech, respiration as well as mastication. Likewise, basal part you're guiding your nerves and then protecting your brain case. So it is based on further the function. These things have been. Likewise, your mandible. It has been divided into your coronoid part, angular mandible, and the alveolar portion. So they have their individual functions again, and then they have their individual role. Now, the functional matrices. So we know that macroskeletal unit is though the combination of bones together, but when they perform a single function, then it is called as macroskeletal unit. Whereas microskeletal unit, further if you take a bone and then divide them into small individual unit, then it is actually a microskeletal unit. Likewise, the matrices, that is When we say macro, for that macro also, there should be a non-skeletal tissue, right? That is what this theory talks about. Whenever there is a bone, there will be a non-skeletal tissue associated that will either origin, growth or maintenance, like control or regulate or maintain the growth or shape of your skeletal tissue. So, what are all those non-skeletal things? That is your muscles, gland, nerves and vessels, even the fat. Here the important thing is teeth. It is considered as a functional matrix. You can't say it is a hard tissue, how you can include, but if you see the functional aspect, teeth plays an important role as a functional or functioning spaces. That is why the teeth is included, irrespective of being a hard tissue, it is actually included as a matrix. The functional matrices are of two basic types. One is periosteal and the capsular matrix. If you see the periosteal, it is the small non-skeletal functional unit immediately adjacent to your skeletal unit, like your muscles, glands, blood vessel, nerves, and the teeth. Remember teeth also. And then these act directly into your microskeletal unit. So whenever there is a change in this functional matrix, periosteal matrix, there will be immediate change in your microskeletal unit, either deposition or resorption. Whenever such kind of things happening, then there is a transformation or a cortical drift. If suppose you see here, I'll show the diagram. See this diagram, so beautifully explained. Here you have a right side diagram, you have a left side diagram. This is the temporalis muscle, right? So the temporalis muscle is coming up origin from your temporal bone and then getting attached to your, apart from the temporal fascia also, attached to your coronoid process. So this is the coronoid process. So whenever there is a contraction and relaxation of this muscle, temporalis muscle is getting attached and it is functioning, then there is a proper development of your coronoid process. If this muscle is getting atrophied, and then there is also resorption in the shape of your coronoid bone, there is a less development. You can see in this diagram, which is in the experimental animal, they have seen that this is with the temporalis muscle, normally how there is a growth of your coronoid process taking place. In this animal, they have resected your temporalis muscle and have seen during the growth period how there is a growth. See, there is a very small rudimentary coronoid process in this condyle which we can observe compared to the such a well-developed coronoid process in these spaces. So, whenever there is a muscle attachment into particular bone, the activity, tonicity, contraction of that particular muscle going to produce a stimuli over the particular bone that helps in the growth or shape or maintaining or controlling the position, shape, size or growth of that particular bone. This is what about the relationship of a periosteal matrix with your microskeletal unit. So the coronoid process doesn't grow first. The growth changes in the coronoid process are either direct or compensatory response to the morphogenetically temporally prior demands of temporalis muscle. The first comes your muscle. Once the muscle actually started origin to insertion part, after this muscle slowly the coronoid process starts developing further. Now the capsular matrix. This capsular matrix are related to your macro, right? See, capsule is big, periosteum is small. Remember this capsule, big capsule. So the macro, whereas periosteum is small, so the micro unit. So transformation of drift is happening in the micro level, whereas capsule there is actually a growth takes place. See here the skeletal units rise, exist, grow, maintain, and respond while embedded within the periosteal functional matrix (CFM). The functional cranial component is organized in the form of your cranial capsules. See what are all the cranial capsules we have? Mainly the 4 cranial capsules, in which the neurocranial capsule is here, orofacial is here, in between you have your optic and then orbital capsule. Otic and then orbital capsule. Otic and then orbital capsule. Now, the neurocranial capsule, as you can see the number 1 diagram, that is mainly your big part. So this is your cranial portion. Whereas orofacial capsule is mainly contributing to your maxilla and then mandible. What is the function of this capsule? So this neurocranial capsules surround and protect the neural mass, leptomeninges and then CCF. Now the orificial capsule, it is mainly for the oronasopharyngeal spaces. This capsular matrices exist as your volumes. That means each of these capsules is an envelope containing a series of functional matrix components. So whenever this capsule expands due to the volume increase, then further your bone will get a translatory movement. See, the cortical drift is kind of your transformation, that is a minor level of surface deposition resorption, whereas your translation is kind of a displacement movement of your entire bone. There is no deposition resorption, directly the bone is getting expanded, displaced. So the translative movement happens because this is a capsule. There is inside certain volume. Either it can be soft tissue or it can be fluid. So in case of neurocranium, what we can observe? We can observe your brain, and then we can have your CSF and blood, also all those stuff. So when the volume increases, the capsule expands. When it is expanding, it pushes the brain case outside. As you can see here, there is epidermis, dura mater we have, and this is the dipole. So this is a scalp. When the brain is actually growing and increasing, it's a soft tissue structure. When it is growing, it is actually it is increasing the volume. So it is pushing the capsule out. When it is pushing the capsule away, the bone attached with it actually enlarges. Here there is no deposition resorption, but once there is enlargement, the sutural area, there is a compensated deposition of your bone. That is a different thing. But here the entire bone is getting translated without any deposition resorption. So the capsular matrix acts indirectly on both totality of their embedded microskeletal unit plus the macro and the periosteal matrices. Likewise, the orificial capsules, we can see the tongue dissonance of tongue. Tongue dissonance is very important. Parietal dissonance and tongue comes down is a very, very important aspect while growth, which actually having the volume, oral volume. So it surrounds and protects the oral nasopharyngeal space surrounded by the skin mucous membrane. Also, it originates by the process of enclosure, like your maxilla and mandible comes and then close joined together, and you have your remaining, like different structures, maxillary process, mandibular process. During the growth period in the intrauterine life, there are various structures coming and then fused together, and then further it maintained. So all excelsior facial skull rise grow maintained within the OFC. There is orificial capsule. How it happens? So the primary function here is the airway maintenance, your speech and mastication also. The airway, but as a rest position, it mainly contributes. So it is accomplished by your dynamic musculoskeletal postural balance. This airway maintenance system is actually proposed by your Bosma. It actually leads to growth of your functional spaces. That is the volume which is actually getting maintained. It is due to the respiration. So increases in the size of the capsule, and it leads to a passive movement of your remaining structures of your nasal bone, your maxilla, and then maxillomandibular relationship. So we saw about orofacial capsule, main function about your respiration. Cranial capsule, neurocranial capsule, which is increasing in the size and the volume, that leads to your enlargement or translatory movement. Why we are studying so much about all these things? We know that this is the most accepted theory, but how does it work? So one thing is for sure, if we alter the capsule, either by increasing the function or increasing the volume, we can alter the macroskeletal unit, right? The same thing we try to do in the clinical practice. We alter the capsule. How? How? By means of giving different appliances inside the oral cavity, we try to increase the volume. When we do that, we try to produce stretching in your buccal cheek tissues, in your periosteum. That leads to changes in your maxilla and mandible. That is how we try to use this functional appliances in the clinical side, which is based on your functional matrix theory. So, if we want to increase the oral volume, we can give a functional regulator which will push your buccal soft tissue, upper lip, lower lip. When it is pushing away, the volume is increases, patient is wearing like this. Patient wants, he is putting the appliance inside and he'll be looking like this, kind of monkey appearance. So when there is such kind of appliance inside the oral cavity, the volume of your capsule, orofacial capsule is increasing. So once it is increasing, then it leads to changes in the maxillary and then mandibular structures. Now, the von Linbox hypothesis. With this, we will wind up. This is important one because this von Linbox, what he tried is that his main work is based on the experimental studies on the cheek embryos. Here, the intrinsic genetic information, that is very important. That is important for what purpose? Intrauterine life, growth period, the differentiation of your different cells from your neural crystal, because we have a single cell, then it divides into two, then after the fertilization it divides into multiple cells. Further, the tissue collection comes, right? How? From same type of cell, differentiation into your cartilage, bone, different cells. These things are happening because of your intrinsic genetic information in that particular cell. But what happens further? That is what this von Linbox tried to explain. He tried to further explain it with your sutural cartilaginous functional matrix hypothesis. Now he combined one sentence I told in between. That is, when I was talking about the neurocranial capsule, I told that the brain volume increases, capsule pushes away the coronal bone which is coming out, the parietal bone coming out. So there will be a gap in between. The gap in between two bones, that is the sutural area which will get filled up further. That is how it is working. So what are all the factors? This von Linbox theory talks, it is not a single factor. It is not only genetic, it is not just your environment or a function. It is a multi-factor because for the initial period we need the genetic factor for the differentiation of the growth and then differentiation of different cells and tissues into a particular group. Later on, there are certain local epigenetic or environmental factors which can also alter. So he has three theory together, 5 factors into it. Intrinsic genetic factor, that is your genetic level, the differentiation in the first initial period. Local epigenetic factor, general epigenetic factor, local environment, general environment. There is a term here comes your epigenetic factors. Intrinsic genetic factor is purely from your genetic aspect. Now comes your local epigenetic factors. Let's see how he is trying to give his essential elements. We know that endochondral growth. In endochondral growth, it is purely independent growth, right? It is an interstitial type of a growth. It is only based on your intrinsic genetic factors. But we have something called desmocranial growth. Here it is pure intrinsic genetic, not always. Whereas if you see the cartilage, it is act as a growth center that is having your intrinsic genetic factors. Whereas your sutural growth is mainly your skull and adjacent skull structures, which is not purely intrinsic. It is influenced by your local epigenetic factors. Whereas your periosteal growth again. The periosteal growth is your, it influences your adjacent structures. Later on, it comes your intramembranous growth. That is an additional local environmental factor which leads to it. So all you have to remember is about this von Linbox theory. I want you to remember it is a combination of your sutural cartilaginous functional matrix hypothesis, and it is having your 5 factors. It is a multifactorial. We have the first intrinsic genetic factor, but apart from that we have one local, one general, one local epigenetic, one general epigenetic, one local environment, one general environment. So 5 factors are there. So to revise once again, we can say in this way, we have the most accepted theory, that is the functional matrix theory. Melvin Mars have talked about the FCC. So FCC were first described by Van der Klaas in 1948. Later on, the Melvin Mars spoke about the clinically whatever things we try to do, even the surgical case, even your corrective orthodontics, even your functional appliances in the preventive or interceptive orthodontics, everything is based on your functional matrix theory only. That is, if you can stabilize it, then only you can able to get a better stability. If you don't follow this balance in your functional matrix theory, then it is not going to produce. That is about